Okay, well, hey, good evening, everyone. Welcome tonight to our webinar series. I guess this is the last one in the series, and I'm excited tonight, looking forward to hearing the information. So my name is Steve Wirtz, and I'm from Tipton County, Indiana. I've been a member of IFWA for about 15 years. I own 30 acres of woods in Tipton County, 20 acres of old woods, old standing trees, and 10 acres of new trees and new grasses. So I've been a part of IFWA and recently joined the board. And one of the reasons that I enjoy being a part of it so much is the education aspect of finding out more about the trees, being more aware of invasive species, and being able to listen and talk to folks that are knowledgeable and excited about harvesting trees and taking care of them. So it's a real joy. It's a great organization to be a part of. So I would encourage anyone that's not a member tonight to consider it and to join us. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve, and welcome, everyone. I'm Liz Jackson. I'm the Executive Director of the Indiana Forestry and Woodland Owners Association, and will be your host tonight. We're excited to have you join us for a webinar with Carroll Ritter, the author of the book Magnificent Trees of Indiana. I have trouble with that word. I'd like to remind you to keep your microphone muted at all times, and if you'll keep your video off during his presentation, that will limit distractions. If you have questions, feel free to put those in the chat box or turn on your mic when the presentation is over, and we'll be happy to take your questions. Carroll Ritter is a retired science teacher. He just told us from Paoli High School, and he has had a lifelong interest in trees and wildflowers. He attended Purdue University and received his master's degree from Indiana University and did advanced coursework in field geology from Western Washington University. After retirement, he assisted Sycamore Land Trust and developed their first and very successful environmental education program working with children. He's an avid mountain hiker, backpacker, and photographer. And he's logged over 2,000 miles on trails in US and Canada. That could be definitely interesting speaking engagement itself. He lives in Williams, Indiana, in Lawrence County, and he practices forest conservation on his own land and still loves and admires trees. I'll hand it over to you, Carroll.
Thank you, Liz. It's indeed a pleasure to be with everyone tonight. And I am an IFWA member too, in Lawrence County is my residence. I have 40 acres down here in the beautiful hill country of Western Lawrence County. And as Steve, I have a lot of old trees in here, a large chinkapin up almost 5 feet across, an old beech, several hundred years old of approximately 6 feet across, not far from the state record size beech. So I'm very familiar with trees. My father taught me trees early on. I was in elementary school when I got my first tree award, a blue ribbon for my bark collection on Indiana's trees. But my dad was very influential in my development and my love of trees. That's persisted all the way through my life. And I have one son graduated in forestry from Purdue. He's an arborist in Olympia, Washington. And my other son is Purdue grad in landscape architecture. He lives in Bend, Oregon. So it's pretty obvious, as Liz said, I was out west a little bit too much, evidently because the boys took to it and they're still out there. But my wife has been very supportive of the book. I think a lot of people have asked me how long it took to create this this very fine volume, what most people are considering it to be. About 3 years, traversing the state from north to south, east to west, visiting many, many counties from the very top to the bottom. And it was an absolute pleasure working with the landowners. When they had a magnificent tree, they loved to see it featured. And they were very hospitable in welcoming me to take pictures of them. The photography in the book was all mine. I had a great friend who will work with me on occasion. to go out and grab a couple of pictures when I could not get that far, or it made more sense logistically to travel out close to him. He took a couple of pictures for me. And then Gary Potts, my good friend, also participated with me in doing some of the photo editing. So it's a product of several different folks. My wife was extremely important to me too, as being my editor. My work, I wanted it to be a very precise work, well-written, grammatically correct, and readable. And that's one thing the focus of my book intended to be, is a readable. It's not just a field identification book. It integrates some concepts and some ID character in the book, as you folks who have the book have seen, but I don't beleaguer identification. I wanted to concentrate on the trees, the magnificent trees being the state champion trees, and those trees in old growth forest tracts that are still left in Indiana. And I also wanted to concentrate on the curious features and facts about trees that a lot of people ask, well, how did this tree get this shape? And why does it look like this? What happened there in the past? And I wanted to focus on that, plus historical and interrelationships biologically, and also to talk about the woodland values of trees. We all know that trees are essentially important in our lives. And so I wanted to spend some time on that in the book. And also with education. Children need to be out in the woods. My boys were out in the woods early on, and they obviously benefited from that. They still do. And I think that education for our youth is extremely important. And that's why the Indiana Forest Education Foundation component of IFWA is another important tool that we can reach this younger generation. With that, I'm going to switch over to my PowerPoint and show you some sections of the book and some of the illustrations of the photographs that we took in preparing this. See if we can go to this and get on here. And see if that was okay. It looks like you are screen sharing correctly here. And correct me if I'm not on properly.
Yes, it looks good. Thank you.
Okay, fantastic. Title of the book, Magnificent Trees of Indiana, and the cover shot. The cover shot was selected by myself and the Purdue Press staff. This was published by Purdue. The press was extraordinary to work with. They have a great staff over there. We went through about 250 pictures trying to pick one that illustrated magnificence, glory, splendor, and we came up with this one here. These are red oaks, and they are in Lawrence County, same place that I live. So I was fortunate to be able to grab a shot that's not too awfully far, about 12 miles from me. The organization of the book was done, as you can see here. I wanted to dwell on the history, which we do early on in the book. Some of the famous people that contributed to the early ecology and study of our old growth forests as they were back in the late 1700s and 1800s. And so I spend a chapter talking about that. We also wanted to talk about the landscape of Indiana, its variations from glacial times, especially the northern effects of glaciation, versus the southern part of the state of Indiana, which does not have a lot of that glacial feature except on the east and the west sides. So I wanted to talk about that, and then the geologic times leading up to the Indiana of today. Another component of the book that I thought needed to be discussed was biological interrelationships, how trees relate to nature in general, the general biology, fungal, algal, mycorrhizal, and the effects that trees have on other organisms. They're all an interrelation ecology. The climatic changes that we are experiencing today also are going to affect our forests in the future. we're already seeing some changes occurring, and Purdue is studying this presently too. So I dealt with that and the value of trees in sequestration of carbon, which is an important concept that a lot of people are concerned about. Primary focus, if we really nail into the major emphasis in the book, is on the biggest trees that are left in the state of Indiana. These are on the Big Tree Registry from the Department of Natural Resources. And so the champion trees are the main thing that grab a lot of people's attention with this book. Of all the species, approximately 75 different champion tree species were visited. And that's a lot. There were over 100 actual trees that could have been visited, but some of those were dead, or some of those were just not available to get to. The next chapter in the book, post the champion trees, are the old growth forest locations. A lot of the current books on trees in Indiana really do not go to some of these old growth forests and focus very much on those, but those places, they're stunning. They take you back 200 years. You feel like you're there when the early Indiana was going forward, and they're magnificent places to visit. And I've listed 20 of those with where they're at. So if you're interested in old growth forests, you can look at that. Trees are beautiful, and beauty is in the leaf in the spring, or its spring blooms. The trees themselves are characteristics. Their characteristics are very, very beautiful to a lot of people. Form and leaves and color. And so a chapter really deals with that considerably too. Odd and unique trees were addressed. As I spoke earlier, a lot of people wanted to know how come this tree looks like this? It's all swollen at the bottom, or it's got a great big swollen growth on its side. What in the world is that? And I deal with that and show some pretty neat pictures of those odd features, including hybridization. The deem oak is in there, and some other trees that are crosses. They're intriguing in their own right too, biologically. The protection and preservation of Indiana's heritage is an ongoing thing. A lot of organizations have jumped in over the last few decades to help preserve some of Indiana's heritage. And then the last one of the last chapters talks about how trees benefit people, and indeed they do. Indiana, a long time ago, we can compare the forest component and then look at the different physiographic regions on the left in Indiana and the type of the predominant trees. There are all kinds of mixes in every region, so it's not strictly as it was then, but you can see how Indiana was divided up a couple of 100 years ago into physiographic regions. And you'll notice the Mitchell Plateau, the Karst and Barrens area is really influential in southern Indiana. And that helps determine some of the tree types and the density of trees as well. The current forest overlay on the right shows you what percent of Indiana today is forested, where it's located, and you can see waterways, you can see some of those ridges, and the southern Indiana is perhaps, the most dominant. In the old days, people like to have their pictures taken with some of these big old giants. Robert Ridgway was one of our early ecologists, and I've read his works back in the 1800s, late 1800s, 1870s, 1880s, 1890s. Robert Ridgway was an extremely important guy, and he visited many of these Wabash lowland forests, being born across the Wabash River in Illinois and then coming over to Indiana to live. Robert Ridgway was one of our most important early documenters of the magnificent trees in the past. Today, we still have places where you can see the old sawing platforms and old band saws, old circular saws, such as this picture in the right that is in Spring Mill State Park. They still run that old saw machine there, and it's quite interesting to come see at certain times. They don't do it all the time, but it's really neat. As I mentioned, the interrelationships in the biological section there, and this is an illustrative picture showing the fungal concentration on an old rotten dead log. And then I go into other things in the chapter specifically about the biology and the interrelationships. The biggest trees, then we just concentrate on that for a few moments and take a few of many in the book. If you've got the book, you've probably walked through it and seen some of these pictures. The bur oak in Posey County down here was one of the most grand left. It is in that Wabash lowland area that was there when Ridgeway was there too. So this bur oak is a national champion. It's about 8 feet across. And we do those measurements at DBH at 4.5 feet up. But look at that basal flare and those roots. And if a person put a tape around the whole thing down at the bottom, you would indeed have a tremendous size tree. It's interesting that when you see an old tree in a distance, yes, it looks kind of big and kind of old, but when you get up to it, it's even more grand than you can possibly imagine. State champion tulip, it doesn't look quite like our grand spire single stem tulips in some of our other woods, but this gnarly old giant is the state champion, and it's about 6 feet across there at the base at DBH. And another one of my favorites over here, a lot of people don't know too much about, are the southern red oak. This in Vanderburgh County is the champion down there, and a grand tree it was too. A lot of oaks are quite fantastic and still reside. Sugar maple, of course, its beauty is not to be surpassed in the fall. The state champion is near Gosport in Owen County. It's in a cemetery, as you can obviously see, but it stands command over the entire whole section of that cemetery. And a grand thing it was in the fall when I visited there and photographed it. One of my very favorites is the swamp chestnut oak. Used to be the national champion in Jennings County. And these trees come and go. You know, some of those old national champions that are on the books, if they die, then you have to come back and look for an existing old champion again. And this one may be back on the list because I think it surpasses the one that's on the current record. But this was a grand tree. The owners were very, very kind in allowing us to walk all around it, walk up to it, and take a fine picture. If you like pecans, a lot of people have seen pecan trees, and a lot of people have not seen pecan trees, but pecan is planted in Indiana. It survives, okay. There's some planted ones in Lawrence County, and this grand champion pecan down here is in Vanderburgh County, near Evansville, south of Evansville, right by the Ohio River. That Ohio River bottomland, it has tremendous number, especially originally pecans. Pecan trees were very abundant down there. And today there are still some very large specimens. One of my other favorite trees, with my wife standing by it over here on the right, is the northern red oak, state champion. You walk up to it and you're humbled. You're just humbled by some of these big trees. This one was a splendid tree, and the family kept meticulous care of the property around this tree. It was very, very treasured. State champion pignut hickory, one of those tight bark hickories. It's on the University of Southern Indiana campus at Evansville, so it's another Vanderburgh County champion. In fact, Vanderburgh has more champs down there than any other county. And it's a great tree, just fantastic. You stand by it and look up, and you're awed by the thing. Ohio buckeye. Most people see these early little buckeyes in the woods, one of your first flowering and leafing out trees. This Ohio Buckeye is a little different. It is a very tall, almost a typical old growth woods type looking tree. And once again, state champion in Jefferson County, north of Madison. Red hickory. A lot of people have never heard of a red hickory, and I've seen it in the books. Marion Jackson's 101 Trees has it in there, and Sally Weeks's great book there at Purdue also talks about red hickory, and this is a state champion down there in Burdette Park in Vanderburgh County. And I hadn't ever seen one before until this, and I was very, very pleased to witness the thing. Next, let's take a look at some of these old growth tracts that I visited. A lot of people have never been to these, any of them, but they just inspire. You could sit there all day long and just be inspired by the growth around you. Calvert Porter Woods is in Montgomery County. It's a state nature preserve. And a lot of these places ended up as state nature preserves. As you can imagine, they were highly sought of by preserve staff for saving and protecting. And my wife's down there, way down at the bottom of the trunk and kind of backwards back there, so you can sort of get a scale of this thing, the big sycamore. And Purdue has its own research woods. Actually, the oldest tract of old growth measurements over decades and decades and decades was conducted over here in Randolph County, near Farmland, a little community over there. But Purdue's Davis Woods has been visited by classes from Purdue and people from around the world as one of the longest studied forests in the world. The picture on the right is Dogwood Nature Preserve. Most people have never heard of the place. We could barely find the place. It was in the Versailles State Park area over in Ripley County, and the beech trees in there were absolutely stunning. It was a majorly, the component of forest component in there was beech maple, and the beeches were indeed fantastic. A classic, Donaldson's Woods. Most everybody in looking tonight has been to Donaldson's. Unparalleled. This just has been a national example since George Donaldson didn't want his woods cut long ago in 1854, and by George, it never was cut. So it's still there for us to see. As you know, old growth forests, they do decline. They come and go. Some of the old patriarch trees in here that I remember years and years ago are gone, but their replacements are there, and they're maturing too. So Donaldson's Woods is a fine, fine place to go. Meltzer Woods in Shelby County, another saved property. The Central Indiana Land Trust has ownership of the property now. It was given by Philip Meltzer's family. He didn't want that woods cut either, and that stayed in the family for 100 years uncut. He was offered a lot of money. In fact, one tree in that woods he was offered, I forget how much the family said, $10,000, $15,000 for that one tree. Anyway, the family said no, and he was adamant about that. He died a couple of years ago, and the family gave that property, sold the property to Central Indiana Land Trust, and so it's protected forever. It's a great place to visit in Shelby County, not too far from Indianapolis. Here's Panorama Hoot Woods, Owen County. It's owned now by Sycamore Land Trust, another one of these preserve properties. Again, this old German family did not want that woods cut, and so a major component of the woods survives today as it was, with wonderful character, fantastic wildflowers in the spring, superb place to visit. Permissions required from Sycamore Land Trust to do that. Pioneer Mothers. Actually, I took classes when I taught high school science. We went to Pioneer Mothers, but it was right there outside of Paoli. And the walnut trees in here have a long-standing reputation. Once again, from 1818, Joseph Cox never wanted that woods cut. He did not want it cut. A little later, in I forget what year, 1930s or something like that, an offer was made to, of course, he had passed away. An offer was made to come in here and cut this walnut, because the walnut trees in there, $10,000–$15,000 walnuts each tree, and a timber company made a successful bid to buy the property. But the local community raised enough money to preserve it, protect it. They bought it back from the timber company. So fortunately, the place is saved, and today it's just a wonderful place to go. Schrader Weaver Nature Preserve is another one of our grand old growth forest places. An old brother and sister lived at that property, and that was never cut either. Turned over to now State Nature Preserve as well, owned by DNR, Division of Nature Preserves. It's in Fayette County, not too far from Connorsville. But you walk through here and it's just a stunning place. That's a big tulip there. Can you imagine any better looking tulip than that? Not hardly. Another place on the right is Hall Woods. Hall Woods is in Putnam County, just close to the Montgomery-Putnam line. When I was on the Board of Trustees with the Nature Conservancy of Indiana, we were working very hard on Big Walnut Creek to get a lot of those riparian court or old growth woods is protected, and this is one of those places that was protected. It's just fantastic. You'll have to read about this place in my book. There was an eagle flying, a great blue heron on the creek, and it's just a day to behold. Evansville has the largest old growth forest urban area of any place in the United States. 200 acres of old forest in a city in the United States left. Lo and behold, Wesselman Woods Nature Preserve, and the park there, Wesselman Park, is absolutely an amazing place. Both pictures are there in the Wesselman Woods area. They were very, very kind in hosting me to come through and photograph all I wanted there. Long ago, Alton Lindsay and other people recognized there was really a special old growth forest over by Turkey Run and Sugar Creek, and it's still there. Rocky Hollow Falls Canyon Nature Preserve is one of our most supreme state park nature preserves. Some of the most grand tulip trees in there that you can possibly imagine. We hiked in an early morning rain in here, and my wife photographed me against one of these giant trees with a little bit of cloudy mist in the background. In southern Indiana, there are many other nature preserve places like Trivets Woods and Wells Woods and other places like that, like on the right side, that also have stunning old beech trees. And then we talk about some of these strange and odd things. Still not fully explained yet about the sycamore red rust syndrome. You can find it occasionally on sycamore, but it's an odd and unique feature. We think it's either algal, fungal, or a relationship between those two that causes this. Doesn't seem to harm the sycamores, but very few show this pattern. But Muscatatuck National Wildlife Refuge is home for this beautiful specimen here. Middle picture of the famed demo. Of course, you know about these hybridizations that occur in oaks. Oaks do cross, they do hybridize. The white oak group will cross within itself. The red oak group will be able to cross within itself. And this famed deem oak is one of those, discovered 1904, identified as a unique new hybrid at that time, named after its discoverer, Charles Deem, who went on in 1909 to be our first state forester. And Charlie Deem got all across the whole state of Indiana some of his very first classified forest parcels that he looked at himself are still there today. So Charlie Dean was a very, very important gentleman in the past, and he corresponded with this Ridgway, Robert Ridgway, that I mentioned earlier, too, who was an eminent ecologist too. So that's called the Dean oak, cross between the Muhlenbergii, the Chinkapin, and the Alba, the white. It's really, this is really crazy because you look on the internet, on Google, and they say it's a cross between white and burr. And others say it's a cross between Chinkapin and burr. But officially, I see that it's a white versus and Muhlenbergii cross. So that's the way we're going to go here. It is a famous, famous tree. Smallest nature preserve in Indiana. It's not much bigger than that little lot with that picnic tree in it. It's a tiny place in Wells County near Bluffton. Another odd feature are the burls that are on some of these oaks. The black oak here has a magnificent basal burl, and that's worth a lot of money just cutting that down for it. But I told the landowner, don't you dare cut that down because it's a great tree. Another odd tree called the spooky tree. This is a white oak that has a scary character to it. If you came in there at sunset, you might be a little afraid to wander around him. He's in Camp Atterbury. So it's kind of a neat place over there. The Camp Atterbury has a pretty neat forest. The spiraling tulip is another unique feature. It's got several possible explanations of why that spiraling goes on up that tree, but it's in Schrader Weaver Nature Preserve in Fayette County. Oh, that's a great place to go for a lot of reasons. The window tree is in Griffey Nature Preserve in Monroe County near Bloomington, and I got two friends to go over there and get pictured in the odd window tree. The next section of the book concentrates on beauty. If you don't see beauty in these pictures, there's something wrong with your eyes, because when I was here, I was absolutely stunned and captured by this tulip. And that's me down there at the base of the tulip with the owner, Mike Scherschel. It's in Lawrence County. And my wife got to be the lucky photographer on this to take my picture by this magnificent tulip. Sassafras in the snow in winter, it can be a beautiful sight. And these are my sassafras trees on my property. Another place of great beauty are the cypress on the cypress swamp area of Muscatatuck National Wildlife Refuge in Jackson-Jennings County. These were planted years and years and years ago, but they've matured nicely, and what a fall palette this place makes over here. So that was extremely important. People and trees we're intertwined. We always have been intertwined. It doesn't matter what century, what decade, we're all intertwined with trees. We grew up with trees. All of us in IFWA, we love trees, our own trees. And then people make use of these trees too. Maple syrup, a big thing in Indiana. And my neighbors across the road do maple sugaring in the spring, and this is the bags and the collection tanks, and so they are busy at work. Another young lady here is enjoying swinging from trees, and I'm sure a few years ago you did the same thing. And what kid doesn't love a good tree? What kid wouldn't like a swing from a tree like this? Well, my grandson is there on our big white oak, 150 to 200-year-old white oak. And we rigged a swing for my grandson to be able to enjoy this magnificent old patriarch oak. Some other children dwarfed by this tree. It's the state champion silver maple. And as you know how silver maple does its forms, it often splits into multiple limbs, but it qualifies around that base. It's an intact at 4.5. It's 36 feet around that thing. So It's maybe the largest single tree still left in Indiana. We're not exactly sure if anything surpasses 10 feet across anymore. It used to be 10, 15, 25 feet across things. And then teaching kids about trees early, put a leaf in their hand, show them the sinuses, the lobes, show them the veins. You know, is it a white oak? Is it a red oak? How you know? So we get the kids involved early. Trees are also extremely important for our daily uses and needs. Cutter Woodworking down near Borden in Clark County was kind enough to host me to come in and look at their mill. They do a lot of trim and molding work down there, and they also contributed to my book. I had a lot of wonderful sponsors for my book, and they were just most gracious people to work with down there too. Another friend of mine that we have, in fact, the cabinets behind me were made by this guy on the right, the Graber cabinet company near Montgomery, Indiana, in Davis County, does fine Amish crafting, and they made the bitternut hickory cabinet behind me back here. It is my bitternut tree that was 36 inches across. It blew down in a storm. We had it wood misered up, taken and planed down, and they've made some things for us out of bitternut hickory, which is fabulous. And so I kind of end with there, of course, I could go on with this, about 250 more pictures of that's what it's in the book. But one of the things I like to do, even in my own woods, is enjoy the silence of the old woods. The old logs, places to sit, watch the woodpeckers, hear the birds just singing, squirrels jumping, going after the hickory nuts. Underneath the log, you may be finding salamanders and only the wind speaking through the canopy of the trees. This is where we can meditate. And I bet a lot of you folks that are Ifwa people have gone out into your woods and you've sat just like this before and meditated, because this is the thing that we need to do today. The glorious trees of the past are still with us and can be, and we need to honor those trees and enjoy them. And that's what drove me to write the book, to the beauty and the majesty of the trees, not just an identification guide, but something that speaks to all of our hearts. So I will stop the share here. You have finished with me that, and we can go back to this screen. And I think Liz is going to entertain some chats.
Thank you, Carroll. We appreciate you sharing your passion with us. And you definitely are recognizing the beauty in these trees that maybe some of us have overlooked in the past. So it's really neat for you to share that with us. I'd be happy to answer any questions or take any questions. And feel free to put them in the chat. If you'd like to unmute your video or your microphone, feels free to do so, and we can have more of a conversation. But you know, we have 109 in here right now, so it is a big group. Somebody asked, how accessible are these trees to reach and enjoy? Do they all require a great deal of hiking, or are they easily accessible to those with mobility issues?
Good question. Many are accessible totally to. Even with some accessibility issues, there are a few that are even wheelchair able places to go to. Some are on private property. Some of the champion trees are obviously on private property. And of course, permission has to be obtained to go see those. I did not put any names and addresses in the book. I wanted to keep that. The private landowner is the private landowner for these things. These are on the Big Tree Registry, most of them, though. That's published by the BODNR, and they do have some of those addresses on there. But I respected the privacy on the private parts there. But like Donaldson's Woods and Spring Mill, Schrader Weaver is easy. Meltzer Woods is easy to get to at the old growth forests. The swamp chestnut down in Jennings County, that great big beautiful swamp chestnut tree is viewable from the road, and I bet if you drove up to the house they'd let you go down and touch it. There are a lot of these landowners that are very happy to have people admire their trees. And I tell you, you park the car and you look at the tree from the road. Yeah, it looks like a big tree. And then I go talk to the owner and he says, yes, go down and actually walk up to it. The closer I got, the more I was stunned and awed. And that tree almost brought me to tears because it was one of the most fantastic trees I'd ever seen in Indiana. So a lot of them are accessible to make your answer short.
I might piggyback off of that. You mentioned many of them are in the nature preserves, and I posted a listing of the nature preserves. You can Google Indiana DNR nature preserves. I might note that there are some of those that aren't available for walking in. They don't have parking or they don't have access, and usually for protection reasons. But you can find online which ones of those are available to walk in.
Yes, perfect. That's exactly right.
Sarah asked, where is that massive silver maple?
Williams, Indiana. It's near White River. It's just west of Bedford. And your car can get within 12 feet of the thing. It's right near the road. It's on private ownership there. And there is a barking dog that kind of scares you a little bit. Although I know the people well now. They got a free copy of my book because they were the most gracious people. And I gave them a free copy of my book. So it's right on the little side street in Williams, Indiana. And another really cool thing about Williams, Indiana, the champion butternut walnut. You know, butternut's affected a lot by that canker, where we've developed some hybrids over there. Jim McKenna and the people at Purdue have developed a hybrid butternut, but this is a state champion butternut. It's about, was it 6 to 7 feet across, still bears nuts, and it's in Williams, Indiana. So that's pretty cool to have one little town with 2 state champions.
And butternut is prone to butternut canker, so you know, it could go at any time if it should get the canker. So that's pretty exciting that you have it. Duck Hunter asked, have you been to the Gene Stratton Porter State Historic Site in Noble County? Gene Stratton Porter is buried at a request beneath a pin oak that was large when she lived on the property over 100 years ago. It is still there and thriving and is a huge tree.
Went by. I was on a mission coming from southern Indiana through Richmond and coming up to Fort Wayne. And I know where you're talking about. Did not have quite the time to drop into there. I know about the Limberlost tradition and the former grandeur of that area and her writings. And I know that the Limberlost Preserve is over there. And so the short answer is I haven't been there yet, but it would be a good weekender.
It's on your bucket list now.
It is.
Susan asked, could you explain how the trees are measured? We lost an ash that was over 6 feet across from the emerald ash borer. We wondered how it compared.
Boy, that's a really, wish it was still there and I could still come over and see it. But you're right, it's the ash it's gone now, most likely. 6 feet across could well be a state champion, along with, you take the diameter at breast height, where you can wrap a tape around at 4.5 feet, and you actually take the circumference of the tree. You also measure the height of the tree. Then you also need to know the limb spread, the crown spread, they call it, of the tree in 2 different directions. Online with the Department of Natural Resources, Division of Forestry, and the how to measure a big registry tree is indeed on there. That technique that I've just explained is in readable detail there that you can see how to do that. And then you add those up together and you get what's called an index for the tree. And then you compare it to any other big ash tree that's the biggest white ash that used to be on the state champion registry is also dead too. So I don't know where we're going to go for the next big champion white ash, if there's such a thing left, you know.
I believe there is old growth in northern Indiana at Bendix Woods near South Bend.
Read about it in my book. You are exactly right. As I illustrated a few of those old growth woods in my PowerPoint here, but Bendix, yes, that's a cool place. New Carlisle out on the west side of South Bend. Had an old friend in South Bend who was a biologist who just passed away a few months ago, and he and I were really close friends. And he said, "Go see Bendix Woods," and so I had to for my book just to see it. Yeah, it's a great woods.
David asks, Carroll, in your studies, what is the oldest tree you have run across in Indiana and what species?
You know, that's another really, it's a difficult question to sort of guess the age of trees, because it depends on if they're open grown, if they're internally forest grown. The ages vary, and then site and wetness, a lot of features determine the age. Probably the oldest one, and they've estimated, at least some gentleman that said that he knew about this tree in Schrader Weaver. It was an old bur oak. He thought it was 500. I'm being on the safe side of saying most of the oaks 350 up to 400. So perhaps that one. But they also cite some of these red cedars, this Juniperus virginiana that grows on the cliffs along the Ohio River. It's smaller stuff, but it's been there. Mike Moya thought, or at least I read in some publication, that Mike maybe thought it was up to 1,000 years. Gee whiz, I didn't see those particular ones there because, you know, I was seeking the state champions mostly. But your question is probably 500 is probably going to be the max that you see, most likely 350 for most species.
Tamara said, thank you for your beautiful book, which I've been enjoying since I discovered it last fall. I'm wondering if any of the old growth forests that you visited have the open forest character that our Indiana forests used to have pre-settlement.
Yes, some of them do. Some are in various stages. Some are in early successional stages within those components, those forest tracts. So you're indeed right. They're dynamic forests. The old growth forests have always been dynamic. You've got all different textures and compositions and structures within an old growth forest. And so some of the places I visited have that early successional, and then mid canopy, and then some of the very dominating old growth. So yes, I have seen that in several different places. That's an excellent question.
Amy asked, do you mention the oldest ginkgo in the state on the IU Bloomington campus?
Seen it. I didn't mention it. I could have. There is not native. I concentrated probably 99.9% on the native trees. I have seen that ginkgo over there, and the state record yellowwood's over there too on the IU campus. That's in my book. That's photographed. Yellowwood's one of those really cool, interesting trees that primarily grows just in Brown County, unless it's planted or borrowed up from nurseries, you know. But IU has the state champion. There used to be one on Butler's campus that was a state champion yellowwood, but it succumbed. And I went back. I was up there at Holcomb Gardens looking for it, and she said, I'm sorry, it's gone now. So I went back down to IU because they used to have on the previous big tree registries the biggest, the oldest yellowwood, and indeed it's still there, and I photographed that.
Andrea said, my area has the Red Tail Land Conservancy, aka fortheland.org. Some of the properties are only open for 8 hours a year.
I'm familiar a little bit with Red Tail Conservancy up there, and the Whitewater Land Trust is up in that general area. I used to be a member of Acres out of Huntertown near Fort Wayne area. Tom Dustin and I, one of the early guys in the Acres, he resided there. He and Jane both passed, but I'm familiar with that. I've not been to any of the Red Tail properties, but yeah, permission is often best sought through contacting them if you want to go to their properties and see A lot of them are just kind of generally open though, so you just have to check with Redtail what properties they're talking about.
Dawn Marie said, oh, no, Susan said a lot of these are great weekender trips. It's a good time of year to see this presentation and plan some getaways. Thanks, Carol. Very good comment.
Take the youngsters along, or the grandkids, or your kids, the grandkids, take them all. Especially get those young ones out there to look up 100 feet up and see those crowns of those magnificent trees.
Dawn Marie said, I'm wondering if you could scale back down a little and give advice about wonderful tree choices for around our homes, beautiful ornamentals that will not overpower the scale of a one-story home they grow near. What are good trouble-free Indiana trees that add to beauty, wildlife, and the environment, and that will be happy with our growing conditions?
I think it's kind of hard to beat redbud and dogwood in general. They have food character. They have the great beauty too. A lot of the other trees in my book, I mean, you can plant the oak, you can plant ginkgo, you can plant the tulip, you can plant a lot of these. Service berries is a good thing to plant. That's in my book too. Some of them other hardwood trees, they grow just a little bit too large unless you've got a large lot and you're willing to be patient with those. So I kind of stick with some of those early ornamentals. Sometimes some hawthorns can be used in there too. So your nurseries, hi Susan, I see Susan Churchill on there. I know Susan Churchill. Yeah, Spice Valley landscape down in your area or other places will have some native. I suggest sticking with the natives as much as possible. No more calorie pears, please, in anybody's yards, please get rid of them.
You said that too kindly. I would be a little meaner about the calorie pear.
Yeah.
You kind of alluded to it just now, but a second part of that question was, do you have any favorite nurseries where you would source your trees?
Well, Woody Warehouse is good up in
Liston.
Liston, yeah. And that's one. My closest down here is probably the Spice Valley Landscaping. And Bloomington has several nurseries up there. I've picked a few things out of the Bloomington nurseries before too. Abel's Nursery on the west side of Bloomington is a great place. So every local community is going to have something within that county, most likely some sort of nursery.
I think the key is to watch for those native plants. And if you're not sure, you can get online and figure out if it's native rather than buy a variety that doesn't belong here. Judy noted there used to be a yellowwood on the Notre Dame campus as well. My guesstimate would be that maybe all the campuses put in some yellowwood. They are a nice street tree and pretty beautiful.
Yeah.
Susan noted there's a good tree nursery, Schneider in Seymour.
Yes, that's between Bedford and Seymour. Yeah, it's close to Seymour. Yes, I've been there before too. Yes, Schneider's is a good source for a lot of trees if you're in that general area. Yes.
Well, it looks like the questions have wrapped up and we are getting about 5 minutes from the hour. So I think we could, to wrap things up now, I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. We hope you enjoyed it. And if you're a woodland owner interested in forestry, we encourage you to check out the Indiana Forestry and Woodland Owners Association. We will send a follow-up email with some background information about some upcoming events. And we'll notify you when this recording is available for viewing. It may take a few weeks. And I want to again thank Carroll Ritter for his time. You're getting a lot of thank yous in the chat box if you have a chance to look at those. His passion for this really just ignites a passion in me, and I'm looking forward to traveling the state, as you all may be too, to see more of what he showed us. So I want to wish everybody a good evening and thank you very much.
And one more thing we might say is where it's available.
I did post it in the chat. I didn't
Okay.
say it out loud, but
Okay,
feel free
sure.
to do that if you'd like.
Are we still on?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, Purdue Press published it. It's available on the Purdue Press website, and sounds like that Liz has already clued you in. Bookstores can also carry it too, but Purdue Press is a great site to get onto get this book if you have not. Makes great gifts as well.
And I shared a 30% off coupon that I thought might be inactive, but I found it to be active today when I checked it. So
Perfect.
extra deal. Thanks
Perfect.
again.
Thank you.